Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Orphan Train Christmas by Rachel Wesson, narrated by Ruth, Urquhart. Chapter 1, December the 5th, 1895. We can't give every child a perfect Christmas. We have to focus on those we can help. Lily set aside the scarf she was attempting to knit. She glanced at the pile of presents Kathleen was sorting into small piles on the side table. I'm worried about you, Kathleen. You haven't been yourself since Thanksgiving. I know it wasn't the day you'd hoped for, but we did our best, given the circumstances. Kathleen knew Lily was right. They had a lot to be thankful for. The children destined to go on the orphan train had escaped New York before the worst of the outbreak of cholera. It hadn't been as bad as the epidemic of 1892, but it was serious enough to result in many deaths. Kathleen, last Thursday was never going to be as special as previous Thanksgivings. The staff were missing the children who left, and we had the little ones to deal with. George, who lost both his parents, and... Kathleen interrupted quickly. I know I am being selfish and silly, but I just wanted it to be a good day. We have so much to be thankful for. Bridget surviving her illness, Bella's and Brian's wedding, the placements for the children. I feel guilty for being upset, but we had such a lovely day planned. Richard missed it due to his work at the hospital. You had to stay away for fear of falling sick and... Oh, listen to me. I am being so whiny, aren't I? Lily smiled her gentle smile, but her eyes were filled with concern. Kathleen, I think you are overtired, and it is normal to be emotional. You were a real trooper over the last few weeks. If it weren't for Sheila and Cook and you nursing all those who fell ill, the death toll would have been much higher. We didn't lose one child. Who else can say that? You beat the cholera, and those children owe you and the rest of our ladies their lives. Father Nelson and the boys, Tommy and Mike, played their parts too. If only the city officials would listen to Father Nelson and others like him. If the tenements were cleaned up and weren't so overcrowded, the disease wouldn't spread so fast. We aren't asking for much, just clean water and good food for everyone. Kathleen knew she was repeating everything Lily believed in and fought so hard for. Some days the fight just seemed too hard, and today was one of them. You can't give up now. I won't let you. Yes, the others did their bit, but you showed true leadership throughout the whole ordeal. You led by example and showed maturity beyond your years. I'm very proud of you, and I know Bridget is too. Lily fell silent for a few seconds, possibly to gather her thoughts and to keep from falling into the same melancholy Kathleen was feeling. We have to learn to celebrate small victories. Big change comes after a series of small changes. So for now we have to forget the bigger problems. We just have to work on making Christmas special. The children are missing their friends who left on the train, and those who lost family members are obviously upset. We must do our best to give them a good Christmas. Chapter 2. Kathleen knew Lily was right and resolved to do her best to get into the Christmas spirit. When will Bridget arrive? Lily asked, obviously trying to lighten the mood. Carl sent a telegram to say they hoped to be here tomorrow. They stopped over to see Jacob and Lizzie and also to catch up with Sally. I can't wait to see them. Me too, Lily agreed. But I hope it won't be too difficult for Bridget to see me like this, and the twins. Kathleen wasn't sure how Bridget would cope, but knowing her sister she would be happy for Lily. You know Bridget, she won't let anything dim her joy for Charlie and you. It's not your fault she can't have children. I know, but it's hard to accept that. She is such a natural mother. I wish things had worked out differently for her. So do I, but at least she is alive. We have to count our blessings, Kathleen responded. But did she really believe what she was saying? It was difficult to accept God's will sometimes. Some people had children so easily, even those that didn't want them. Others, like Bridget and Carl, who desperately wanted to be parents, couldn't. They heard sounds of children fighting upstairs in the bedrooms. Kathleen stood up. You stay where you are and rest. I will see what's going on. Are you hungry? Can I fetch you a sandwich? Lily laughed. I know you all think I am a glutton, but I can't help it. I am starving all the time now. A sandwich sounds good. Can you ask Cook to put in some of her pickle and some apple slices with the ham? Kathleen rolled her eyes. Lily's unusual sandwich combinations made everyone smile, but Cook insisted on making them just the way Lily asked, regardless of how stomach-churning they seemed to everyone else. Chapter 3. The children had finally settled down for the evening, and Lily had enjoyed her pickle, apple and ham sandwich. Kathleen had settled for a plain ham and was sitting at the fire, toasting her feet. Charlie would arrive soon to take Lily home. She glanced at the pile of presents on the table. "Do you think we will have enough for all of them?" Kathleen asked, her teeth nibbling her lower lip. "Kathleen, the children will be thrilled. Most of them haven't seen an orange before, let alone had a whole one to themselves. Cook is baking sweets. She let me taste her chocolate fudge, and it is amazing. Those are the presents the kids will like most. They may benefit from the socks and gloves and warm underclothes, but they won't be jumping up and down with excitement because they got an extra pair of socks." Kathleen knew Lily was right, but she wanted this Christmas to be perfect. Only George, one of the orphans who had lost his parents to the cholera outbreak and was currently living at the sanctuary, had seen a Christmas tree before and remembered getting gifts from Santa. The other children didn't have such nice memories. They would be leaving New York in January on the next orphan train, and she wanted them to leave with good memories. "Have you finished the paperwork for Father Nelson, Kathleen?" "I have the cards for the new orphans to do yet, but the rest is done. I have made a list of all the placements we made in the last year. Thankfully, Bridget and Carl adopted their own recommendations and kept such records. It's a pity it took the committee so long to agree to their suggestions." "Yes, it is, but committees take a long time to agree on anything. Charlie went to a few of the meetings, and he said they seemed most worried about the extra costs involved in checking on the children placed with families." Kathleen sighed. Her sister and brother-in-law had come up with several recommendations to protect the orphans leaving New York and other places. Having seen for themselves how hit-and-miss the placements could be, they had suggested to Father Nelson and his co-committee members different ways to protect the children. But it always came down to a question of money. Some people believe money was more important than a child. "Can't they see we would have fewer orphans running away if the families were vetted before the children were placed? I know it isn't realistic to check on every family who takes a child, but I believe Carl was right when he said the mere threat of being checked on would be enough to ensure some families treat the children better." "We have to accept small victories," Lily told her. The committee agreed to the families being vetted by the senior members of the town, be it the priest, pastor, or mayor. Each child will have a record of their placement now, so they can be traced in the future should family members appear. It is better than it used to be. But it isn't perfect. There are still families taking children who shouldn't own a skunk. Lily smiled at the reference before moving forward, a serious expression on her face. "Nothing is ever perfect, Kathleen. We have to work with what we have and be grateful for forward-thinking people like Carl and others for pushing good ideas through. You should stop being so hard on yourself. I don't want any of our children being subjected to the abuse my brothers endured. Look at Michael. He's spending Christmas in jail. He wouldn't have ended up there if a good family had taken him in. I love you like a sister, but you know that's not true. Michael was in trouble before he ever left New York." Chapter 4. Kathleen knew Lily was right, but she didn't want to admit it. She didn't want to think about Michael, because then she thought about Shane, and he was even more of a disappointment. She started counting the gifts again, mentally matching them with each child. This Christmas would be fabulous. "Have you asked Richard if he wants to have Christmas dinner with us and the children? Charlie and Carl will enjoy his company. Father Nelson may join us this year as well, depending on what he has going on in the church." Kathleen could feel the heat rising from her neck into her cheeks at the mention of the doctor, even though Lily was the only other person in the room. She hadn't told Lily. Richard had declared his feelings on the train when they brought Shane back to New York. Since then, Richard had never mentioned the subject again. He seemed set on staying in New York, and she still wanted to go and live in Riverside Springs with her sisters and Bella. Didn't she? "You haven't asked him yet, have you? What are you waiting for?" Lily exclaimed. "I know you haven't seen much of him over the last few weeks. He's been working himself into an early grave. He and you are cut from the same cloth." Kathleen knew Richard had worked harder than anyone during the outbreak, with no regard for his own personal safety. He had taught her a lot about caring for patients suffering from cholera, and she had no doubt he was the reason the children had all survived. He really was a hero, and she loved him. But she couldn't just tell him her feelings had changed, could she? Surely she should wait for him to say something first. What if he had changed his mind? "Lily, I can't. The man is supposed to do the courting, and I feel as if I'm chasing him." Lily burst out laughing, causing Kathleen to stare at her. "Kathleen, you can be so dim at times. Why do you think you spend so much time here at the sanctuary? I mean, before everyone fell sick. The man was here so often I was tempted to ask him to move in." Lily smiled at her own joke. There was a clear no men allowed rule at the home, and Lily took the reputation of her sanctuary very seriously. "He comes to check on the children to make sure they are healthy," Kathleen said. "You know that. Before the outbreak, those kids were the healthiest orphans we ever had. Richard has no reason to come visiting, apart from the fact that a certain young lady lives here. He couldn't make it plainer." Kathleen squirmed in her seat. She wanted Lily to be right, as her feelings for Richard had grown in the 16 months she had known him. At first she was grateful for his kindness to Patrick, the orphan she had met on her trip west, and then to her brothers. That was why she had hesitated when he first declared his interest. She thought it was just gratitude on her part. She knew now her feelings had deepened. It wasn't just her physical attraction, although she thought him very handsome. He was also kind and funny and caring and wonderful in so many ways. She had seen how hard he worked and how much he cared for those around him, particularly the little ones. Lily wasn't letting her off the hook. "Didn't he ask you to numerous shows and events over the summer?" Lily asked. "Yes, he asks me to speak about the orphans, how difficult the trip on the trains can be, and how damaging it is to be overlooked in town after town. He says I help him to raise funds for the cause." Lily blew her hair out of her face, as she often did when she was exasperated over something. "You spend a lot of time together. Have you let him know how you feel? Not by telling him, but with gestures. Maybe he is shy." Richard, shy? Kathleen didn't think so, but was he waiting for her to bring up their past conversation? He'd said he'd wait however long it took, but maybe she had taken too much time to realize her feelings. Had she lost him? He did spend a lot of time with her. He was passionate about children receiving the best care possible, and often told her about his arguments with senior doctors at the hospital. He spent hours trying to convince his peers to spend a couple of hours a week seeing patients who couldn't afford their fees. He often complained his fellow doctors couldn't see a person's worth unless it was attached to a wallet full of cash. Sometimes she thought he might say something about their conversation on the train. She had caught him staring at her a few times, and he often held her hand, even when he didn't need to. The other night, when he helped her out of the cab, he had held her waist for a few seconds longer than necessary. She wished Bridget were here. She could talk to her sister and ask her. Lily was a very good friend, but she was biased. She knew Richard and liked him. In Lily's head, she had them already married off. "Lily, stop matchmaking. Now, I said I would help with the Christmas tree decorations. Do you want to come up to the sewing room?" "You can run from me, but not from your heart, Kathleen Collins," Lily teased, before putting her hand on her bump. "I think I best stay here. Junior is kicking me again. I swear he will walk out there himself if he gets any bigger." Kathleen could see how tired her friend was. Maybe Lily would nap if she were alone. "Put the knitting down and close your eyes for a few minutes. The children would love to see you later if you feel up to it. They want you to pick out the best decoration from the ones they made for the tree." Lily smiled, but her eyes were already closing. Kathleen pulled a blanket over her friend and left her to rest. She wondered what was keeping Charlie, as he was later than usual. Knowing him, he had gotten caught up in studying. He had decided to take his law exams and was working hard when time became available. As she walked toward the sewing room, Kathleen wondered if Lily was right. Was Richard waiting for a sign from her? How could she tell him she was in love with him? It wasn't something you just announced. Not if you were a well-brought-up lady, someone a doctor would want for his wife. Chapter 5. Mary Clark threw a glance over her shoulder to make sure nobody was following her as she moved deeper into the dark alley. "Kenny, are you there?" she whispered, trying to find her brother without bringing the attention of any of the gang members to her. She didn't want to be caught alone in a dark alley by any of them. She had heard the whispers of what they would do to a lone victim. Where was her brother? He knew better than to be out this late at night. It was dark, and the temperature had dropped. Mary pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, although it offered little protection. She thought longingly of her coat, even though it had been too small for her. But her ma had sold it 2 weeks ago. If the money had been used for food, Mary wouldn't have minded so much. She dismissed the thoughts from her mind. It was pointless worrying about a lost coat, especially as her 5-year-old brother was missing on a freezing night. "Kenny, come on out. This isn't a game. We've got to get home or Ma will be furious. I'm freezing. I promise you, Kenny, I will leather your backside myself if you don't tell me where you are." She heard a sound up ahead. Her heart slowed as she struggled not to turn and race away, back to the relative safety of the area around the tenement where they lived. "Mary!" a pitifully low voice called out. She rushed forward, all fear for herself forgotten. She slipped in a pile of dirty slush, grazing her knee, but she ignored the sharp pain. Pushing aside a trash can, she found her brother, lying unmoving on the ground, a soft blanket of snow covering his lower body. Was he dead? Terror made her voice harsh. "Kenny, what happened to you? You've been fighting again, haven't you? Ma's going to kill you." Mary pulled her younger brother to his feet as she spoke. "It wasn't me fault, Mary. They was kicking Jack, and he's too little to defend himself. They were mean, real mean, but I got them back. I kicked them hard." Mary ruffled her brother's hair as she ran her eyes over his body. His coat, not much better than a ball of rags, was hanging off his shoulder by a thread. His scraped knees showed through his pants, and he lost a shoe. But it was the gash on his forehead she was most worried about. He brushed away the blood with his sleeve, almost subconsciously. She tore a piece from her underskirt. It wasn't exactly clean, but it was the best she could do. She had to tidy him up before they went home, or Ma would have a fit. She pressed the cloth hard against his wound, despite his protests. "I got to stop the bleeding, so quit squirming." He winced as she nursed him. In an effort to distract him from the pain, she asked, "So where is this Jack? Does he live around here?" "Sort of," Kenny answered, his eyes darting to a newspaper on the ground. She followed his gaze, jumping when the paper moved. Before she could stop him, Kenny swooped down and gathered something in his arms. "This is Jack." Kenny thrust his shoulders out as he held out a pitiful excuse of a dog. Her brother was watching her closely, so she did her best to hide her horrified reaction. The puppy was skin and bones and had nearly as many lacerations on his body as Kenny did. She was about to tell Kenny to put it back where he had found it when the puppy opened his eyes. Big chocolate-brown eyes captured her heart, just as surely as Kenny had done when he was born 5 years previously. "Ah, the poor little mite. He looks like he hasn't been fed in a month of Sundays," she said, putting her hand out to the puppy. She knew better than to try to pat the dog. He had to get used to her first. He sniffed and then moved closer to her. She didn't for a second think the attraction was anything but the smell of the bread roll she had eaten for lunch. He licked her hand, tickling her. "Kenny, you can't keep him, you know. You have to let him go." "Ah, Mary, I can't. Jack will die. Those Kenneth Clark, don't you go using that type of language. Wait until the priest catches up with you." Her brother mumbled an apology, but she saw his hold on Jack tighten. She wished there was a way they could keep the pet, but she might as well have wished for a fairy godmother. Their Ma wasn't known for her kindness. In fact, the dog might be in more danger at their home than if they left Jack on the streets. "Kenny, love, you know Ma won't let you keep him." "I hate her. Why does she have to be so awful? Mrs. Fleming was kind, and God took her away. Why couldn't he have taken Ma and left Mrs. Fleming?" Chapter 6. Shocked by her little brother's outburst, Mary didn't know what to say. She couldn't reprimand him for his lack of respect for their mother, as, in fairness, the woman they called Ma didn't deserve respect or anything else. All she cared about was what was in the bottle or pail she sometimes sent Kenny to collect from the bar. Mary pulled her shawl tighter. They needed to get home, not just because of the cold, but if her Ma didn't have dinner, the booze would have an even worse effect. "Come on, Kenny, we've got to get back. We are late already." "I ain't leaving Jack here." "You can't bring him with you." "I can. I'll hide him. She won't find him. Please, Mary, don't make me leave him here. He will die in the snow." Mary knew she should have insisted, but she could never say no to Kenny, especially now with his tears making 2 tracks down his dirt-covered face. The blood had started dripping again from the cut on his forehead. Jack whimpered too, as if to ask could he please come. She laughed at the expression on the puppy's face and found herself saying yes. She didn't want to think of the price she would pay when her Ma found out. Nothing ever stayed hidden from Ma for long. Kenny carried the puppy close to his chest as they trudged along the alleyways until they got to their building. Mary kept an eye out for their mother, but she was nowhere to be seen. Did that mean she was still in bed, or had she gone out already? She kept Kenny behind her, shielding him as they walked into their room. The fire was almost out, so she rushed to put more kindling on top. Their room was almost colder than it had been outside. There was no sign of their Ma. Mary kept her shawl on as she rummaged through the dresser for some food. She had left bread and a small hunk of cheese there that morning, but it was gone. There was nothing for them to eat. "I'm starving, and so is Jack. When's dinner?" Kenny whined, as he sat almost on top of the pitiful small fire. "How about I treat us both to a bowl of soup from old Murphy's stall? Maybe you might have a small bone for Jack?" Kenny threw himself at her, grabbing her by the legs, almost making her fall over. "You're the best sister ever, Mary." She hugged him back, wishing that were true. If she had been a good sister, she would have found a way to protect Kenny. He was so thin his clothes, such as they were, just hung on him. Mrs. Fleming used to joke he was a gannet, always starving. But since she died last year, things had been even worse for her brother. She went to find her hidden pile of coins. Her Ma didn't know about this money, or else she would have spent it. She insisted Mary gave up all her wages, but the foreman had given her some extra pennies for getting a job done earlier than expected. It was these she would use for her brother's dinner. "First we need to clean you up." "Ah, Mary, do you have to? I hate being washed." "Yes, I do. We don't want the neighbours talking about you. Do you want Ma to know you were fighting?" Kenny shook his head. He didn't complain, even when she washed the cut on his head. She didn't have anything to cover it with. The air would help it heal faster. "Can we go now? My belly hurts." "Yes, Kenny. Let me just get rid of this." Mary threw out the blood-stained water and hid the evidence of her brother's mishap. Their Ma didn't need an excuse to beat Kenny, so it was best she didn't find out about the fight. Chapter 7. Kathleen Collins sat by the fire in Lily's house, her sister Bridget beside her. Lily sat on a chair on the other side of the large fire. Richard, Carl and Charlie were in Charlie's office discussing business. Kathleen was thrilled Richard got on so well with her friends. "Richard seems to be progressing well with his studies. Charlie says his reputation is growing," Bridget commented. Bridget and Carl were staying with Lily and Charlie, as was their habit when they came to New York. Their fears for how Bridget would react to Laurie and Teddy, Lily's twin boys, were unfounded. Bridget adored both of them and insisted on being their main caregiver so Lily could rest more during the final stages of her pregnancy. Kathleen was struck again by how unfair life could be as she watched her sister with the babies, which proved what a wonderful mother Bridget would have made. "Richard has operated on quite a few rich people now, so he's hoping news of his talent will spread. He still wants to set up a clinic near the sanctuary so he can spend a couple of days a week helping the poor. They could never afford to see a plastic surgeon. Most of them don't even call the doctor when they are ill," Kathleen replied, staring deep into the fire. "I don't think his work during the cholera outbreak won him any friends, though, not among those rich people. They didn't seem to understand his need to be among the poor." "Don't judge them too harshly, Kathleen. People are afraid of cholera. Most doctors know how easily it spreads, and they didn't want a repeat of what happened back in '92. Bridget admonished gently, before surprising her by saying, "Richard and you are well suited." She looked at her sister in shock, having assumed she would be concerned about the age gap. "You don't think he is too old for me?" Kathleen asked Bridget, who was looking at Lily with concern as Lily moved in her seat. She was huge in her advanced state of pregnancy. "From what Bridget says, you were born old," Lily teased her, as Bridget nodded while smiling. "Shane likes him too." Kathleen wasn't sure she wanted to talk about her brother. She had thought the young man would have learned his lesson, but since coming back to New York, he had gotten mixed up with the old gangs from the neighborhood. He seemed to spend a lot of time down in Hell's Kitchen. Lily told her often Shane was just working through his experiences and would be fine in time, but Kathleen wasn't too sure. She didn't see her brother as much as she should, but on the rare occasions he showed up at the sanctuary, he always looked half-starved and showed signs of bruising. He hadn't looked much better yesterday when he arrived at Lily's house to say hello to Bridget and Carl. Lily had invited him to stay, saying she had plenty of space, but Shane had declined. He didn't stay long, saying he had business to take care of. Nobody had asked what type of business. "Kathleen, stop screwing up your face. You look like you sucked on a whole bag of lemon drops." "Who are you thinking about, Shane or Maura?" Bridget asked. "How did you know?" Even as she asked, Kathleen knew the answer. Bridget had always been able to read her mind. "With Christmas coming up, it's only natural your thoughts would be on our family." "What about Michael? Has he written back to you yet?" Bridget asked. Kathleen shook her head. She had written to her brother every month since finding him. In the last 15 months she had 2 replies, the first a letter for last year's Christmas, and the second a note on her birthday. This year she had sent him a parcel for Christmas with some new clothes, warm socks and underthings, as well as a couple of books. She didn't know if he would get the gifts or not, even though she had included a note for the prison guards with a small gift for them. She hoped Michael had gotten them. The weather was viciously cold, and no doubt the prison was even worse than usual. "What is the latest on Maura?" Lily asked as she slipped off her shoes. Kathleen noted her friend's swollen feet and pulled up a stool for Lily to rest them on. "Tommy and Minnie Mike found out a little about the man she and the others ran off with. None of it was good news, and we haven't heard anything else. Neither of them thinks we will see Maura again." Bridget's lips thinned. Kathleen knew she hadn't forgiven Maura for what she had done. Bella had been lucky to walk away with a minor head injury, not that Maura had stopped to check on their friend after her new man-friend had knocked Bella out. "Oh, Kathleen, Bridget, I am so sorry. I know what she did was wrong, but she is still your sister." Kathleen didn't want to talk about Maura, but wasn't sure how to change the subject. Thankfully, the door opened and the men walked in. "Are you ready to go, Kathleen? I can escort you home before heading back to the hospital," Richard asked, after he greeted Lily and Bridget. "This late?" she said, standing up. "Yes, I have a patient I want to check up on." The operation went as well as could be expected, but I can't help thinking I missed something. I won't sleep without seeing her again. You're so
Sample complete. Ready to continue?